Algeria's dealings nowadays with France have been periodically strenuous, but mostly civil. But in April 1827, they were persistently sour as Algeria was at odds with France. And you won't believe why. If you don't know about Algiers' history, you might find this story to be some cartoonish behavior. 'Cause you're about to see how a weaponized fly whisk got the North Africans over 100 years of French rule. You see, back then the Ottomans were running things in Algeria, and they had installed what was called a Dey to rule the people. Not day as in day and night, but Dey as in D-E-Y, a word which is derived from the Turkish word of uncle. And in 1827, the Dey of Algiers was called Hussein bin Hussein. Now, Hussein was also a businessman. Part of his dealings included lending money to business ventures of interest, a venture capitalist of sorts. And at the time, some local merchants were owing him money. When he demanded restitution, the merchants explained that they were unable to pay the Algerian ruler due to the French government having unpaid debts with the merchants for some wheat they had bought. Allow me now to set up the scenario in detail. At this time, France was in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars. And as the emperor famously said,
Une armée marche sur le ventre.
An army marches on its stomach. And in the early 1800s, Napoleon's army was as hungry as you could expect, due to his military campaigns against much of Europe. And so to feed its people and army, warring France had contracted two prominent merchant families from Algeria to import wheat for them. The two families were the Bakri family and the Bajana family, who had formed the Bakri-Bajana Company for this venture. The trading arrangement got traction, but after some time debts began to pile up. The debt collection became even more troublesome when Napoleon eventually lost to the British and Prussian army, as France's new rulers began to give the Algerian families, and by extension, Hussein, headaches about the repayments, which had ballooned to 14 million francs. Hussein then decided to mediate directly with the French for the payment owed to the merchants, which, of course, was ultimately owed to him. France cunningly renegotiated the debt down to 7 million francs and then went on to renege again on the debt repayment. By 1827, the Dey's patience was wearing down, and while he was attending a conference where the French diplomats were also present, he decided to confront them on the debt again. When the answer given by the French envoy was evasive, he swung his fly whisk in their direction and hit the French consul on the face. Whether it was intentional or not remains unclear, but the consequences for this reaction were certain. 132 years of French rule. After the incident, France demanded an apology for the embarrassment, and when it wasn't forthcoming, she sent her warships to the capital, blockaded it, and eventually invaded. Hussein Dey's forces were eventually defeated. The Dey was then sent into exile in Italy, where he died in 1838. France would then take over the whole country and only grant Algerians independence in 1962. Looking back, this just has to be one of the weakest excuses ever given to invade a country, and one of the most naked acts of aggression emanating from a trivial diplomatic tiff. After independence, the Algerians' first president would be Ahmed Ben Bella, a man who led the country's liberation movement against French rule. His hold on power was brief, though, as by 1965 he was overthrown by his defense minister, Houari Boumediene, in a coup d'état.
Overnight, there's a new strong man in Algeria. Colonel Houari Boumediene, in the light suit, confers with Abdelhamid of the United Arab Republic after a pre-dawn coup ousted President Ben Bella and installed Boumediene, his right-hand man. Boumediene's ouster of Ben Bella posed many puzzling aspects. For long before the successful revolution against the French, he was always at Ben Bella's side. He trained the army. He commanded those forces with surface loyalty to his boss. His politics, a blend of Islamic Marxism, was the same as Ben Bella's. Why did he oust his former buddy? World capitals were abuzz with theories, and the most likely was that Ben Bella seemed to be wooing his former enemies, exiled Algerian leaders who had been campaigning against Ben Bella from France and Switzerland. Meanwhile, delegates to a pending Afro-Asian conference in Algiers were in confusion about the status of their scheduled meeting. One delegate remarked that it was like preparing to go to the theater and not knowing whether anyone had printed the ticket yet. It's all up to Algeria's new Iron Man, Ouari Boumediene.
The country continued to have a typical style of government for the region, meaning one-party rule. Although, unlike most one-party states, Algeria had a long stretch of peace. However conciliatory it may have been.
The face of a country celebrating its 10th birthday. For 7 of these 10 years, this man, Ouari Boumediene, has held the reins of power. His domain defies precise labeling, an Arab nation, yet far removed from the Central Arab bloc. In parts, highly modernized, yet devotedly anti-colonialist. Geographically, part of the African continent, yet only an hour's flight from the former master, France. It's this mixture of contrast and paradox that Boumediene must hold together as he strives to modernize Algeria and consolidate her world position. In 1962, when de Gaulle made peace with the Algerian insurgents, the French took with them civil servants, doctors, lawyers, and engineers. They left the country without telephonists, station masters, or plumbers. The new tower blocks of Algiers suggest, superficially, a remarkable recovery from this situation. True, Algeria under Boumediene has advanced far since the early anarchic days under Ben Bella. The giddy idealism of 1962 has given way to Boumediene's own style of pragmatism. And nowhere is this pragmatism better illustrated than in the changing course of Algeria's petrochemical industry. True, Boumediene took the foreign oil companies under state control last year, but this gesture to socialism is nicely balanced by other steps in the same field. Over the next 25 years, Algeria has contracted to supply natural gas to the eastern United States, bringing in a foreign revenue of between $50 and $75,000 million. And while strongly anti-capitalist, has never shown any reluctance to export this same gas to West Germany, France, Britain, and Italy. And on the political front, while preaching an amalgam of Islam and socialism, Boumediene has taken politics out of national life. The sole political party, the FLN, has not held a full Congress in 8 years. The flamboyant Marxism of the country's first president, Ben Bella, is now only a distant memory to most. Rolls of parchment, the key to Boumediene's way of doing things on the land. The drone of bagpipes provides an unusual overture to land reform. بلهوان أحمد بن عمار بلهوان جناتي أحمد بن عمار. It's a real meeting point between Marx and Mohammed. عمار بن عمار. قديش في عمرك؟ On occasions like this, the distribution of land deeds and farm equipment to formerly landless peasants, Boumediene makes one of his rare public appearances. Behind the face of the statesman, a shy, rather austere, but not unfriendly man. Again, the same blend of idealism and reality. The peasants now own the land they used to work for others. But instead of working for a remote government agency, they will be working in a cooperative, self-ruling along Yugoslav lines. But even important reforms and innovations like this don't give the real key to Algeria's planned future. The agricultural growth rate is set at 3%. While growth in the industrial sector is a projected 15.5%. This is what Boumediene really wants, to turn Algeria into a modern industrial nation run along socialist lines, with the heavy industries taking precedence over all other sectors of the economy. At once the enfant terrible of Africa, Algeria now acts with a newfound responsibility, returning ransom money and now, significantly, taking a hard look at the emigre groups who found shelter and support there. Until this year, such groups could count on financial help from the FLN, and in some cases were even accorded semi-diplomatic status. But the signs now are that time is running out, at least for some of the more extreme groups. Algerians generally are beginning to realize that they face more urgent tasks than playing keeper of the world's revolutionary conscience. Despite a crash program, illiteracy still runs at nearly 80%, unemployment at around 15%. Algeria is luckier than many of its North African neighbors, with its vast oil, gas and mineral deposits, and in having a relatively stable, though authoritarian government to guide it towards its goals.
Houari Boumediene died in 1978 and was succeeded by Chadli Benjedid, who continued the authoritative yet peaceful state of affairs he inherited from his predecessor. As the Soviet Union began to disintegrate in the early 90s, multi-party elections began to take place in one-party states on the continent. Naturally, by 1991, the Algerian people also had enough. They began to have a preference for Islamic government and showed it in the elections. Unsurprisingly, the Algerian military resisted this by canceling the elections and ousting the president. This crisis would end the peace that had been maintained since country's independence. Algeria would then join the list of countries in civil wars during this turbulent time in history. It lasted from 1991 to 2002, claiming at least 150,000 lives. Ever since the peace was restored, though, Algiers kept a steady hand, even avoiding the extremes of the Arab Spring. The capital city of Algiers has benefited much from this stability. With the successful hosting of the 2004 Pan-Arab Games and 2007 All-Africa Games, Algiers has returned to its reputation for habitual bliss. Although the closed nature of its government continues to linger, which limits the country's tourism potential. Outside of Morocco and Israel, Algeria really doesn't have a national beef. The country rarely makes the headlines globally, mainly because of its functioning government, which operates in a region and continent considered to be the unruliest of all. With that being said, it's the long-dormant volcanoes that are the most terrifying when active. And if a 10-year civil war is anything to go by, then the current peace will depend very much on a sustained and enlightened period in Algeria's governing.